Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Brock Lupton, and with me today is Justin Seitz. Today, we're going to talk about operationalizing OSINT for legally defensible investigations. First, I'll introduce myself. Like I said, my name is Brock. I've been the head of Hunchly for the past 2 years, since September 2023. Prior to taking on this role, I was involved in leading OSINT investigations team. And prior to that, my background was working within government within the Canadian Armed Forces. Justin, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Justin Seitz. I spent a lot of years in cybersecurity, wrote a couple of Python books. Claire and I came up with Hunchly together, and a couple of years ago, I struck out to do more work in indigent defense. And ultimately, I spend a lot more time in court now dealing with digital evidence than I ever have.
That's awesome. So, digital evidence is what we're here to talk about today, and this is one of the most common questions that we get from Hunchly users and from customers is how can I use tools? How can I do my investigations to capture information and capture intelligence and then use it as part of my evidentiary process? This is the goal of many very high stakes investigations, ultimately, whether it's in law enforcement or legal defense or insurance, many other places like this, is being able to produce evidence that can be used and can be introduced possibly in a court or can be used for further investigation by law enforcement and other bodies. We're really excited to take questions on this topic. Justin loves to answer questions, so please make sure to drop any questions you have into the chat at any time, and we will answer as many as we possibly can at the end of the webinar. So, with all of that being said, we'll get right to it. So, Justin, let's talk about some basics. What are the key legal guidelines and best practices that govern admissibility of digitally collected or digitally sourced evidence? And are there any universal standards or commonly adopted regulations? Where should people kind of get a start to think about this? Like, what should they look at and what should they maybe start to understand before they get into this?
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge is, of course, there is no universal standard, right? There is no kind of one overarching law or governing document that covers all of this. The Berkeley Protocol is definitely a good place to start for a lot of people, just kind of thinking through how to document things. But I think most people, whether they come from journalism school or even a regional training center for law enforcement, you're taught really the basics of documentation long before you touch a computer, which is what happened, where, who, when, and how did you get that information? So I think when you start to look at the federal rules of evidence in the United States, or you look up here in Canada, this is kind of the expectation, is having provenance, being able to explain what you found and where. And I think that for anyone doing this work, it's not just the digital evidence. A lot of folks in law enforcement will know this. We're reading your handwritten notes. There's a lot of stuff that is not open source intelligence. It's collected through informants or other things. If you only apply these documentation standards to one end of your cases, then you're going to leave other parts that are really going to be sloppy. So I think the basics, which is something that I've always preached, is really just about methodical documentation and timelining, all the basics that really we kind of cooked into Hunchly from day one should be applied everywhere.
Okay, so really like the concepts that apply to more traditional investigations and putting things into evidence, they really just apply to the digital realm as well. It's not really a new concept. It's maybe just a new medium, right?
Yeah, no, I think that that's exactly it. I think if you were to look back at early training materials for any investigative type job, you're going to see the same thing, the who, what, where, when, why type stuff. And even the basics of building a timeline for a case, which I think was really something a lot of people were taught at some point in their careers, is just like, I've yet to see a criminal case with a timeline developed. Not one. In the last 2 years, not one. I'm the only one who shows up to court with timelines. And that's a frightening thing, because I think it's also a sign that we're breaking away from the basics and becoming too reliant on tools, right?
Okay. So kind of following that up, when we're collecting digital evidence or capturing information and I want to use it for evidence, how and when is that considered to be admissible? Like how can a team work to build legally defensible investigations and investigative workflows? And do you have any best practices around collection and maybe documentation? And can you talk about how you work and in your experiences, how these things kind of, what are your best practices, I guess?
So, as it relates to admissibility, there's what a lot of laws and statutes and rules might say, and then there's what actually happens in the courtroom. And what happens in the courtroom, it really depends on the judge's vibe that day. And I mean that. So, I've been in hearings where evidence that was an unidentified police officer taking a picture of an unidentified person holding a phone with an unidentified text message on the phone. So we have no idea how any of this came to be. Totally got presented over objections in court because the judge ultimately in those moments gets to decide how the rules are applied. So the challenge or the trick really is that I don't, when I have to present materials in a hearing or say at a trial, because I'm applying that, I know where I got everything. And I'm using very basic things like spreadsheets and Hunchly to just keep everything organized and keep track of it. I tend to be able to publish and get through my evidence very quickly. No objections. There's no like, where did this come from? Whereas I find that people who don't do that, they spend a lot of time sitting there getting cross-examined on how did you even get this? Where did it come from? So the reality is that what's admissible, it's a lot more vibe than hard rule, is what I have found. And I mean, I've had judges tell me I don't know the definition of hacking. I've also had judges tell me that I don't understand how malware works. So I think this is also, when you have to examine that, like, that's not a failure of the judge, it's a failure of us as technicians that we've waited way too long to educate people about how this all works. Right. So that I think is it all kind of boils together. But if you want to have a bad day in court, just do, the minimal, don't document anything. If you want to feel pretty relaxed under a cross-examination that everything you collected was done lawfully and you can back up how you did it, it's not that stressful.
Okay.
We already have some great questions I see coming in too. I love it.
Very cool.
Hunmin's like, don't say that, Justin.
So I know that like we see a lot of challenges from investigators that, that people reach out to us and they have a lot of different challenges that they're facing. And I think some of the biggest things that we're seeing really are around just like being able to document that information that they're collecting, like to be able to accurately document it. But then like you're kind of talking about, right, like being able to explain and demonstrate, I think, the process of how that information was collected. And some of the other things, that we're noticing is, and I think it's probably tied to education, but there's like this insistence on having PDF copies of things, and then PDF copies don't accurately represent digital information from websites, and then having to, probably educate people in court or different consumers of the intelligence as to why that happens, right? And I think that's quite often, those things and looking at like integrity of the information that's collected. I think that's where kind of some of the tools that we promote and we use kind of come into play, right, to help with that.
Yeah.
The web is like I always say though, like the web is a living environment that's constantly changing, right? And it's hard to constantly accurately capture digital information from such a dynamic place.
Yes.
Since you've been working on the stuff you're working on now, you've been involved in some interesting cases and some different things. Can you share some high impact success stories where open source information or intelligence shaped outcomes or influenced public opinion?
Yeah. So, in some of the work that I do, for example, in a case in Oklahoma, I'm a volunteer investigator for Oklahoma Appleseed. They spend most of their time working on domestic violence survivors who are incarcerated as part of their victimization. Either they were coerced into committing a crime or they defended themselves. In one case that was a particularly egregious case of abuse, all of the expert testimony, the domestic violence testimony from 1982, I think, had been destroyed in a flood because, of course, all the documents, the court record, everything is actually physical. And all of this evidence that had been given by an expert, and I saw someone mention Dauber challenges. So this expert gave this testimony in the 80s and flood destroyed it. So what I used was open source intelligence to actually pick my way back through all the places that her and her abuser at the time had traveled. I filed document requests all the way along, and then I was able to discover a journalist had captured part of the expert testimony when they were reporting. And so I was able to use that as best evidence to show that this is the best evidence that exists of this expert testimony. So it was basically like 30 pages of methodology. Here's all the things that I tried to find, all the courthouses, all the stuff. And here's this one newspaper article that has to stand in its place. And this is a powerful thing because these cases rely on that evidence and being able to demonstrate that this type of work, what we do for open source intelligence, it can be incredibly useful in these really strange ways where digging up artifacts is actually now the best evidence that exists.
So you mean like actually going and finding physical?
Sometimes, yeah.
That's really
Sometimes
interesting.
it means I've definitely like sat down even here in Saskatchewan, sat down at a tape and reel and pulled audio off. We work with archivists all over the place to find recordings, hard documents. You'll find stuff in the United States too, particularly like in Oklahoma. There's a lot of Western history. So like cowboy museums will have crime records and stuff in them, weird things like this. So you become quite used to working with people that are librarians or archivists. And yeah, sometimes we physically go out and visit.
And so what about like coming back to the really the topic at hand, right? Like around digital evidence, is there anything else that jumps to mind about, interesting cases that you can talk about?
Every case is interesting. And I think it's that whole, the thing that I think Nico Deakins has been preaching forever, which is it's the mindset, right? So every time you're approaching a new case, it's really, what do I know and what else can I learn? And sometimes, the best evidence for a bullet strike is actually from the high definition newscast that shoots a spot later. It's not from the forensic team that takes the pictures. So it's like keeping your mind open to who are all the people that are generating evidence around this location before and after an incident. And I think that this mindset is really what allows you to also, spot the problems where investigative bias or I've seen everything from investigative bias so that you're only looking for evidence that points to one person's guilt instead of the totality of what's going on. And it also helps you think through extremely complex cases because generally from the intelligence world, we're used to dealing with things like crime syndicates or like larger scale intelligence gathering operations. That type of stuff works well when there's like a complex murder scene with 50 people running everywhere, that type of thing, because I think a lot of people tend to get overwhelmed. Intelligence analysts tend to start breaking things into graphs and starting to understand how they can actually analyze or break it down.
Yeah, I remember like we worked together in the past and even applied targeting methodologies and mindsets to understand organizational structures in order to break work down into manageable chunks. Yeah, it's really
Yep.
interesting.
Yep.
So coming back to tools and workflows, can you talk about what tools are part of your day-to-day workflow? What kind of arrows do you have in your quiver? What tools do you use to support different phases of the work that you're doing, from like planning to collection to analysis to production and then sharing and dissemination?
Sure.
Yeah, and then I guess on top of that, like based on what you know and like your experience, I think quite often you're on the other side of law enforcement, or you're on the defense side of things in court cases. What do you see from that angle that makes you understand like what's missing from the toolkit that they're using, or how they're collecting evidence or presenting things in court?
Sure. So I think the first part, my toolkit is really simple. So it's underpinned, of course, by Google Chrome and Hunchly. I mean, there's not a case that doesn't have it.
We had to give ourselves a shout out, right?
I mean, I guess. Did we have to though?
Oh,
Really?
yeah.
So but it's never have I patted myself on the back more than actually having to bring Hunchley stuff to a lawyer. And they're like, holy crap, everything's here. It's like, yeah, wow, I actually became a real target user for that tool. Aside from that, it's Google Sheets and a Google Doc. That is it. Most of my cases, they come in, and all law enforcement customers will know this. You get discovery. So it's going to be usually about 2,000 pages in a PDF that's got everything imaginable in it, from ballistics reports to interview notes to you name it. Not every case is going to have like a UFDR or a Celebrite package or something similar, but many do. You're usually going to have Axon body camera footage. And that's just because a lot of it is if they even just go pick someone up for an interview or whatever. So you're talking like thousands of pages plus hours of video, pretty much standard every single case. There's no tool that's going to help me with that other than reading and watching.
Mhm.
So a lot of it is really like the strategies that I build to not get overwhelmed by that. And that is really just again, the basics. And I can go thousands of pages and tens of hours without ever opening a browser tab, right? Because the details of the case are not actually out on the internet, right? I already have access to things that are only available under subpoena or warrant. So really what I'm doing when I break out of this is to understand what the news coverage was, understand the area that something occurred in, understand who the people are that are involved. And for me, I also do extensive due diligence on every witness, law enforcement, otherwise, everybody. So that means I'm picking through their old court cases, their transcripts. I'm understanding how forensicators testified in the past and what they're going to testify in this case. So I take, I guess, the research into a case extremely deep on every case. But it's also because I don't spend any time screwing around with tools or waiting for things. It's just me, a timeline and documents with a little bit of OSINT on top. And that is really, I think, the bulk of my work. If I was not doing criminal defense, indigent defense specifically, I probably would have a slightly different workflow if I was doing, say, anti-money laundering, right? Which might be a lot more intelligence based and a lot more out in the
Or
open.
like cryptocurrency, you much more like focused on cryptocurrency network investigations and things like that, right?
Well, and that's like something I don't do. I recently did get CAM certified in anti-money laundering. And I mean, it is incredibly a totally complex, crazy world in that anti-money laundering world. But I really see how a lot of it is like intelligence driven, right? Like they're able to do a lot. And there's an expectation in anti-money laundering that you're doing OSINT actually, that you're doing due diligence and know your customer, and that should not just rely on internal due diligence
Yeah.
sources. People are
Yeah.
expected to go and actually do adverse
Exhaustively
media.
follow every
Yeah.
lead. Yeah.
Well, you would hope it would be exhaustively. Yeah. Whether it actually is, I mean,
Yeah.
that's to be determined.
So the other part of my question, like, what do you see from maybe prosecutors or law enforcement, or you're doing these digging up these old cases and investigating them and like poking holes in the prosecution's evidence. Like, what do you see from that perspective of how they've like what did they miss when they submitted? What have they done that allowed their digital evidence to be challenged, and what kind of things do you see there?
Well, I mean, I think that for the most part, I mean, the nice thing is in a lot of the places that I do this work, it's the forensicators that are bringing the evidence forward, right? They're usually the ones who have to take stuff off of phones or, pull stuff. And in my experience, they're great. They know exactly how evidence and everything works. It's just that forensicators and typically the folks who are doing OSINT analysis or any type of work like that, they're not the lead. They're not the lead detective on a case, right? They're specialists.
Yeah.
And so this is where I see, stuff that I used to talk about for years, which is really like this strange situation where a forensicator can only go so far and they only have so many cases to manage. And then you'll have, the lead detective run off with a piece of evidence, and then it's kind of too late, right? So now the forensicator has got to only testify up to a certain point and stop, instead of having these kind of best practices being applied across the whole case. Now, these are probably larger organizational and statute problems and stuff that's far above my pay grade, but it's not usually like the notion that I guess I would show up in a case and just poke holes in it is just not how it works, right? And the reality is most juries don't want to listen to me sit there for 3 hours just poking holes in something.
Yeah.
It's usually fundamental problems with the case. Like, you have not a big one. So this one I see in cases from wrongful conviction 2005 all the way up to present, where they're taking a forensic analysis of a phone and not getting subpoenas or warrants to actually close the loop on the other side of a conversation. So if I'm visiting with you right now on my cell phone and it says Brock Lupton, for example, I can just change your name in my address book to something else and start taking pictures of it to make it look like I was having that conversation with Claire, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing stuff go in that should be corroborated with a warrant to the cellular provider or to the social media person or whoever, but that's actually just showing up all on its own in court. So these are not, it's not like, that's not even evidence to really knock at. It's kind of an eyebrow raise thing. Like, what is that?
That's even just basic rules of investigations and evidence, right?
Right. But by the time you've got someone incarcerated
You have to
for a
validate
year, and I mean, and
intelligence.
this is the reality, right? And so is that a forensicator doing stuff like that? No. It's it's a homicide detective, or it's a burglary detective, or that kind of thing. And it's not their fault either, because they are not supposed to be digital evidence experts.
Right.
Right. So you
They
see
might not
how,
have any training or
and neither the forensicator nor the detective want their cases to be run poorly. Right. But you can see how things, you get a little crossover in there, and then all of a sudden you're making assertions about conversations and conspiracies that you actually have no evidence of. So these are the types of things that I'm seeing. I don't particularly get involved in the let's poke holes in a case, because if you're poking holes in a case, that's one thing. It's usually, if I'm involved, someone made a really big mistake somewhere.
right.
That's usually my experience, right? Because most cases are done properly by law enforcement. Most cases in a high percentage in North America are pled, right? They don't go to trial, right? Because that's just not the reality. And in most cases, nobody's really incompetent at all. It's about just applying the law and making sure people have due process. When I usually get involved in cases that people go, we don't know what the hell's going on. And that's a bad sign.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess like getting like looping back kind of to the start of our conversation, really like
Mm-hmm.
using something that's simple, like Hunchly. There are other tools out there that are very similar. That is just maybe reducing some of that chance that things are not being collected properly, right? So like the bare minimum kind of standards of date and time stamping information that's collected and applying a hash to it to support integrity checking. Like
Sure.
that really goes a long way towards helping get things submitted and admissible and accepted, right?
Yes, and also just thinking of ways that your investigators and your digital techs can speak a common language, like a spreadsheet or a document,
Right.
right? So that you're able to kind of start to speak a common language and say, like, let's at least track or work on a timeline together, so that people are starting to think about how to work a little bit more closely, that is not sitting beside each other at a desk, right? So I still see there's just no common language being still not being spoken. And a
Right.
lot of that points to tools too.
Interesting. Okay. So a fun question now that I have
Oh
for you.
no.
And this is one of the things that I get asked all the time. People always ask me, like, what is the history of Hunchly? How did you come up with Hunchly, Brock? I didn't come up with Hunchly. I inherited the greatness that is Hunchly. Thank you, Justin. But Justin, can you talk about where did the idea for Hunchly come from? Like what caused you to come up with this idea? What I know I kind of know what the story is, but I think it would be really good for the audience to hear you kind of in your own words talk about like what you were doing, what kind of process you had and what pain points you realized existed, and then what you did to solve it, and maybe talk about your philosophy behind inventing or creating Hunchly and making it into what it is.
Sure. Yeah. So, in during the ISIS kind of heyday, 2012, 2015 years, I was doing a lot of investigative work and just kind of research work into particularly foreign fighters. So people who are interested in leaving Canada, go, head to Turkey and jump over and join the war on one side or the other. So there was a lot of really interesting stuff going on. This is also when there's a lot of propaganda being produced, and some of it involving Canadians as well. And I went to bed one night and I just looked at my phone. And on the National Post, there was a picture of two fellas from Alberta that I recognized because I had seen their social media and had seen some of the extremist stuff that they had started to be posting. So I got out of bed, ran to my computer because I'm like, oh, I know those guys. But when I went to their Facebook profiles, they were gone. And this is pretty normal for people who are about to bounce. They would, of course, remove their social media and then they would turn it back on. And I was like, oh my God, I must have screenshots somewhere or something of all the stuff I was looking at. Nope, no screenshots. No, I had their names and their Facebook accounts written down. That was it. And this was a really good example of how I saw like some initial kind of extremist content all the way to people now having completely joined the war. And I was like, I can't believe that I screwed this up so badly that I didn't take a single screenshot. And it wasn't like, and I just felt, like when you back your vehicle into something and you have that sick feeling in your stomach and you're like, oh. So I went to bed and it was
It's
kind of
even
like the
worse because
next.
you know you saw it. You saw it.
Exactly. Well,
Yeah.
totally. Right. And I'm just like, I can't. And that is a bad feeling as an investigator, knowing you saw something and then it's gone. And then I just kind of woke up the next morning and I was still kind of berating myself. Like, I can't believe you're so dumb. I mean, there's got to be some way to prevent you from being so dumb, really. So that's where it came from, was really, I was like, I need a tool that's just going to do this automatically because I never want to feel like this again, basically. So I started working on it and then I, started chatting with friends, and I was doing investigative consulting at the time. And I kept being able to turn up captures of everything we were looking at, and everybody started asking me, what were you using? And I was installing, it used to be Python scripts and an $11 HTML template. That was Hunchly 0.x. And from there, just kind of kept running with it. So ease of use was always the thing. Stay out of the way. Don't make me think about using the tool unless I need to. And that's where it always just shined for me. It was like I just turn it on, go do my thing, and everything was captured for me.
So, and then how did it become like I think from going from that basic tool, like how did you then turn it into, like where did the ideas for adding things in like case management and report writing and those types of features, where did they come from?
Customers.
Customers.
Yeah, we never really, Divya and Phil really made sure that I was never allowed to come up with features. That's like the number one rule. Never, never, never let Justin come up with
Things are
features.
still sort of like that. Don't
Yeah, I bet you all
don't
have that
listen to
written
Brock.
somewhere. Yeah, or Justin.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it really, no, it was always the focus was customers, and even some of the stuff that's hidden behind the scenes, like the hashing of all the images into a separate folder. That comes from the Ontario Provincial Police. I still remember the officer's name working on a CSAM provincial strategy team, right? Where it's
Right.
like, it'd be
Okay.
great to just generate hashes like this. So I used to have a lot of crazy ideas about what it could and should do, but very quickly you realize that customers want something that they can rely on and you can slowly build on. And it's also where I think that seeing them kind of the marriage between Hunchly and Maltego will be so great because they will be able to kind of break out of that and do larger scale collection with it.
Right. Cool. Okay. I think at this point we can jump really quickly into a demo of using Hunchly. I think probably lots of people have used Hunchly. You have to bear with me because I'm terrible at sharing my screen. I'm going to share, what am I sharing? I put together kind of a little bit of an investigation and let's see if this comes up. You see, have you got me?
Oh no,
It's not working.
that's no, I got you.
You got
It's
me?
just that I can see me.
Yeah,
That's
I'm
why I'm
doing an
saying, oh
investigation
no.
into Justin Sites because you're such a high profile, famous influencer in the open source intelligence community that, I figured that you're the good subject of an investigation. So I think
You're a
one of
good
the
guy.
things that, and I even have a case. So I'm just going to turn my Hunchly
Huh.
cap on. I've already got this put together, Justin. I already have a report written, but just for everybody
Hey,
watching.
Mecha Hitler.
What? No, this is Blue Sky.
I
Yeah, I
know.
see Mecha Hitler. No, it's not. We're not going to talk about that. Hi. So just so everybody knows, I think the way that Hunchly works really is that, we have two components and I'll start off by just showing it in the browser. And I think the philosophy of doing investigations online and on the web for us, a lot of the times is that investigations start inside the browser. And, like for me, in my experience, whenever I've gotten different tasks or things that I have to work on, it sounds cheesy. There's a million different tools out there, and I know there's probably way super slick, advanced ways to do things. But I always go to Google and I do a search, and I make sure that I
Oh
turn Hunchly
no.
on. So Justin Bieber. So I've already created a case in my dashboard. I have Hunchly set up, and I just have it turned on. And so this is going to just start capturing everything that I'm doing, and you'll see the little Hunchly extension guy turn orange. And look at that picture, Justin. We'll just do some quick research.
So youthful.
Yeah, I don't even, what is
Hey,
this? Google book.
where's my abs of steel ab tension? Where's my full body of work here?
Oh, that other one?
There, do you know who that is, Brock?
Who is that?
Let's see. Does anybody in the chat know who that is? Can they tell me who that is in the Q&A?
I have no idea who that is.
Anyone? You just keep going. We'll see. I'll keep an eye on the Q&A, see if anybody. Nope, not Neptune. That is my alter ego. Is a real person.
So I'm just doing my
Pat John Brown.
yeah. So
Nice.
clearly Justin doesn't use Twitter anymore. I think that's a bit of a dead end. I'm just going to go back to my search. We'll see what else we can find out. He's an author, so he's written some books. He's got some books on Amazon. Yeah, look at that. So very interesting. But really, I'm just following links and just going, look, there's a German version, Hacking mit Python. I'm just kind of like I'm browsing the web and I'm doing an investigation and really like this is kind of the start, I think, of a lot of online web-based investigations. So I'm going to jump over now to the Hunchly dashboard and I'm going to see about sharing this screen over here. And forgive me because I'm terrible at Zoom. Justin, I have 10 thumbs. So here's the Hunchly dashboard. This is the other part of Hunchly, and this is where the case management and kind of all the magic happens. And basically, this is locally installed on the system. And the way that Hunchly is working is as the extension's running and it's capturing the pages that I'm looking at, everything that gets captured and gets pushed into the local, really, it's a database that's installed locally on your system. Every piece of information that gets put into that database gets hit with a date and timestamp of when it was collected and a SHA-256 hash, and then you can use that later on to show that the file or the information that you've collected hasn't been altered. And we can support a bunch of different file types actually, because you can manually add attachments. You can also set this up to automatically capture things as you're downloading them, but this allows you to do things like use a third-party tool to download a video and then attach that video to your case, and it gets a hash, it gets a date and a timestamp. It's very simple, it's very user-friendly, and so you can see now, here's my case that I've done about sites, about old man sites. And I looked at 129 pages. I've done 18 searches. I took one note. I didn't use selectors or anything because this is just kind of my preliminary look to see if there's any value in pursuing this. And I've got two captioned images. And then down here you can see here's the history of the pages that I've captured so far. And what this does is it shows you as a page is captured, Hunchly takes a screenshot, and we also use the feature within Chrome that allows Chrome to save a web page as a single file MHTML file, and we capture that as well. And then that gets you the page source and any JavaScript that's on that page, and all of this stuff is captured. And then you can see, I'll go into one that I know looks pretty good. Here's jms.py on Twitter. Here's his profile. This is the MHTML version of that page. So when I look at this, I can do analysis on this. It's offline. This is the locally saved version of that profile. And if we go up here, we can see here's when we captured it. You see that it, as Hunchly captures things and puts them into the system, it applies an ID. So that's an internal Hunchly number. It's just like the 907th thing that's been captured. But more importantly, we get the date and time stamp of when this was captured. So I'm in Central European time right now. I'm on an awesome trip to visit Maltego headquarters. And sorry, Justin, you couldn't come. And then we get the hash, and here's the hash of this capture, and then this is associated to that data that's now in the database, and you can see here's the page. And then if I jump over here, I can see here's the source and here's the JavaScript. And so you can put together and do all of your collection, and you can do analysis, and you can export this and use it in different ways. But kind of the big thing then is that you can create a report from this. This is a kind of quick and easy sharing. So we've done an investigation. We need to move this on to maybe provide it to I'm the forensics investigator or the OSINT investigator that's working for the law enforcement agency or whoever it might be. And now I'm going to provide this to the detective or whoever's been assigned with this case, and they want to have a report on what does the social media footprint look like of the POI that we're looking at. And so here's a quick and dirty investigation. Everything that I've done here now, I can attach these into my report and write this up, and I can provide a full history of everything that I've done so that they can see what my workflow and my methodology was. And then when I export this, I'll have to jump over to my file that I have saved that I'll have to find, of
I
course.
use that feature all the time. The like to kick out quick little reports. It's
That's what
incredibly
that's what
useful.
I always use it for too, right? Like I know
Yeah.
that I think ultimately what you want to do is share like I think in a bigger subject or a bigger investigation, you're going to take all this stuff offline, and there's going to be a bunch of analysis, and like that's where now that we've joined Maltego, you can start to use all the other tools within the ecosystem and do that analysis, and then maybe use different tools to generate a big fleshed out report. But if you need to do a quick, like Justin's saying, like a quick report that you just need to get out. And we worked on lots of stuff together, Justin, where that's exactly what we did, right? Like here's a quick report. Somebody needs to take action on this. So here you
Mhm.
go. This is written. It's TLP clear because Justin's not that secret. But you
Nor
can,
important.
here are the screenshots that we captured in the investigation. It tells you, okay, what was the URL? What was the source of that information? Here's the hash that's been applied to it. Here's the capture date and time. And I've just put this together. And then on top of this, what we really recommend, so this is very basic. What we really recommend is, I talked about how quite often that we hear that users are getting asked to provide PDFs and stuff like that. We always recommend that you use the case export capability that's within Hunchly and export the entire case. And then that allows you to provide a compressed file of the case with all of the artifacts that have been collected. and everything is sorted into the different relevant folders. Everything is hashed that provides screenshots, HTML files, PDF copies, a list of all the hashes, all the date and times, any notes that were taken, any attachments that were downloaded. And you can provide that along with the report. And then the recipient of that report has the ability to open that case file. And we have a very simple interface, an HTML interface that allows them to browse through that case data and get an idea of what's in there. And then that kind of, I think, quite often will answer lots of the questions that the consumer of that information or that case data is going to have. Is there anything, did I miss anything, Justin?
You did not. 10 out of 10.
Okay. Sorry, sir. You're going to jail, by the way.
Yeah, it looks like it. Jeez, 129 pages. How long you been doing this, dog?
This is only my recent investigation. The real one's like 5,000 pages and it's got all kinds of videos and stuff. I don't even know if you know that they exist.
I needed the money.
I don't think we're supposed to talk about that. So I think at
Okay.
this point we've got 20, there's 27 questions.
Holy,
So Justin, if you wanted to go through, we'll take this
let's do
point now
it.
to kind of answer some of these questions. If you want to pick some,
Sure. Well, I can just go rock and roll here. Sure.
yeah, I
So,
think we've got lots of time.
yeah. So Brad asked about how to handle dauber challenges, and this isn't and there will be dauber challenges. So, and again, not an attorney.
I don't even know what a Dauber challenge is. Can you
I was
explain?
just about to explain
Okay,
it, but you see how you interrupted me, Brock.
sorry.
Unbelievable. So in the United States, there's the notion of this: if you have an expert who shows up, he's going to give expert testimony, and people want to challenge their expertise, it's called a dauber hearing. So this is a special hearing where that expert is brought in, their CV is brought in, there's evidence on both sides that is given from usually someone wants to knock that expert and prevent them
So
from
this is
testifying.
specifically to challenge the expertise of the expert witness.
Yeah, and again, there's other variations of it, but generally people call it a dauber. And so me as when I because I don't always testify as an expert. Sometimes I'm literally just like an investigative fact witness taking the evidence and showing people. But when I am an expert, there is the ability for a prosecution to say, hey, we want a hearing to make sure you actually know what you're talking about. So as it relates to that, that's really a legal question. When experts are asked to testify in these cases, if there is a dauber hearing, that is something that you're either, if it happens on the prosecution side, the prosecution is going to assist you as the expert or your defense counsel to help prepare for it. But it's really like, are you a liar? And do you know what you're talking about? If you're not a liar and you know what you're talking about, they're not really that stressful.
So are there any are there tips to actually handle that, or is it just to be like as forthcoming and
High
like
integrity.
explain things
Experts are
as
supposed
clearly
to
as
be
you
high
can?
integrity. Yeah, I mean, you're supposed to, everybody technically, right, should be high integrity. If you're in a court, it's really about your knowledge. It's focused on really on knowledge, but there are ways to impeach people. Like, for example, if I like in one case say that Facebook doesn't exist, and in the next case I say it does, right? There are experts out there that do this type of thing
Yeah.
on and Mark Lanterman's a good one for that's a defense expert that's under FBI investigation right now because you just hope no one ever reads case A and case B and sees that you're just giving evidence that people want to hear. Really, it's like most people are not, they don't wake up thinking I want to lie today or break the rules, but that's what Dauberts are there for specifically around expertise. The
Right.
next person says the Met UK police used to teach the basic of reporting: day, date, time, place, who, what. That's like, I wish I could show you my workspace is just every case has got a timeline with that in it and the parties, which really mimics when you look at an old school detective's notebook. It's like that's what they do. They make little timelines and they're like connecting people along as they're flipping, and it's the same concept. So the Met is doing it right.
You don't have to go in order, by the way. You can scroll through.
Oh, I'm just okay. I'm just gonna grab a random one. I think someone said hi somewhere in here.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
see that there is one
Hi,
about
David.
stumbling over unprotected classified information.
Yeah. Where was that? Where?
That was Brad.
Ah, no, this is a good one because it happens to me too. So off topic, time to time, you stumble across unprotected classified information. Since I don't work for the government or a government contract agency, I do not have access to like a field security officer. How do I report this? So again, not a lawyer. If for me, this does happen to me occasionally. Or for example, there's times where say a regional police department accidentally gets something into their discovery that shouldn't be in there. For me, again, it's notify attorney. And then most of the time, the stuff that I encounter, it's call the FBI. You just
Yeah.
there's actually phone numbers you can just call in the States. But again, that's me under the guidance of an attorney under very specific situations. I think for anybody else, it's really about, you know, talk to a lawyer before you do
Yeah, I
anything.
think yeah.
Like
I got.
literally
I'm gonna
anything.
pick one of these out. It's from anonymous, but what is my and your recommendation for working with social media such as Facebook, where profile images in the timeline are not captured? And I think this is a common one that comes up, and I think most it's easy to screenshot that stuff, but like actually capturing, doing really good MHTML captures of meta platforms in particular are difficult, and it's because how they construct they construct the profile and they load from lots of different sources. And I think one of the things that we often recommend is to use the note feature, specifically in Hunchly, is to use the note feature so you can right click and scroll to where you need to be, right click and choose take a note, and that automatically forces a screenshot. But then you can also do manual captures. And then the other thing is to change your settings to have it capture all the time. So capture every change that happens and then reload the page and scroll through it. We're working on some solutions for the future that I think are going to solve these problems, and that's something we're excited to have coming out. But I think that this is a pretty common one. You'll see this with any of the infinite scroll kind of dynamic Java-based websites or platforms. They're more and more difficult to load. There are lots of solutions like scrolling screenshots and things like that, but to get a really good forensic MHTML capture is a bit more challenging, but you can still get what you're looking for and put it together with some trial and error. And you can always reach out to us and we can work with you and walk through that and see if we can help out.
Well, there's also I was doing some onboarding in your fancy training onboarding system at Maltego,
Oh,
and
Maltego,
Maltego
yeah.
Evidence, yeah, and Maltego Evidence looks like it solves some of those problems too,
And
which is nice.
yeah, I spent the day actually talking with the evidence team. And I think if people aren't familiar with Maltego evidence, I think that outside of Germany, it probably has not been that well known. And it's definitely worth checking out. Maltego evidence allows you to like do some really interesting things and get some really good forensic capture of not just meta platforms, like not just Facebook, but Telegram, Twitter, VK. It's completely focused on social media and does a really good job of forensically capturing that stuff. And I think we're actually talking about, now that we've joined the Maltego family and we're part of the Maltego ecosystem, we're looking at where can we start to integrate and bring the expertise of all the different teams together and build more features and, find those integrations that are really going to work.
So many smart people over there.
I know it's crazy. How did they hire me? Okay.
Also a good question.
So any more questions, Justin? Do you see anything else?
Oh yeah, I mean, what else do we got here? Admissibility of cryptocurrency and blockchain analysis. Can I speak on this? And I really, that is a great question because I'm assuming that the question is really about how do you bring in blockchain evidence and then educate the court and educate everybody that actually everybody has a copy of this evidence. It's not like a cell phone extraction, right? That requires privilege
Yeah,
or process.
it's out there publicly. Everybody can see it.
Right? Yeah. So, but I think honestly, and I also saw someone else say here, Roger, say that like, and this ties into this, that like nearly all of Roger's court experience was expert evidence broken down. A lot of it was educating the judge and everybody, including the defense and everyone, on what the evidence is, not providing it, right? So you're explaining what things are. You're spending 80% of your time explaining what something is versus talking about the evidence itself. So I think that this is where we have to like also tie it back to like cryptocurrency stuff. It's easy to get into court. Explaining it is where you have to spend your time. I had to sit on the stand in Kansas not long ago and explain how Facebook authentication works to 12 jurors of, a variety of ages, and why it's important that, like, when I log in from my phone, there's forensic artifacts on my phone from that login, but also all of the logs. And right, I mean, you have to be able to explain how things work. So I'm less worried about the evidence and more how you explain the cryptocurrency stuff to jurors and judges and stuff, which is, yeah. But in terms of admissibility, I would assume it's got to be pretty easy, that part, because it's all sitting right there.
Yeah, and I
It's
think
like
like
admitting a New York Times article. Like, that's not
yeah,
something that anybody
and
can.
I think the investigation platforms for cryptocurrency, like if you have access to them, like Chain Analysis or some of the other ones, like they're very polished at this point, and the teams there are really have a lot of expertise in working with various levels of law enforcement and getting that
Yeah,
stuff admitted. I
yeah.
think we probably could take two
How
more
much
quick
time we
questions. You want to
got?
pick
Okay.
two more?
All right. Ooh, this is a good one. Question: is there any, and this is more of an investigative one, but it's a good one. Is there, and thank you, Alex. Is there any legitimate way to retrieve information on a Delaware entity? So Delaware is in the United States, and they have a lot of protections around corporate registrations and directors. And so the short answer is no. I have yet to find a way to penetrate the veil of Delaware corporations, which is why most people incorporate there, I think. Now, the second part of that question was same question for Vancouver and Toronto. Here's where the news gets really good. In BC, they probably have the best public records in Canada, actually. It's one of the few places where you can look up actual court records by defendant. It's one of the few places that has a very extensive, like, corporate registry and stuff that's not archaic. Here in Saskatchewan, it sucks. So in BC, you can use what's called Service BC or Service Now BC, I think. I think there's even some British Columbia investigators here. And in Ontario, same deal. You'll have to set up an account with one of the providers, but you'll be able to use it. I generally start with opencorporates.com for that type of stuff because it does a good job of at least pointing you at the registries in Canada that might have it. The only downside is that you're gonna have to set up accounts both in Ontario and BC to do
But of
this.
course, and
Delaware's,
all that stuff is digital, right? It's all electronic, and so you can capture it with Hunchly,
yes, exactly.
put it in your
Entity
case file,
numbers,
timestamp it,
Adamus,
hash it.
yes,
I
and
think we're
use corp.
probably, I think we're out of time for questions, actually, Justin. I just want to reassure everybody that all of the questions that weren't answered, we're going to answer them by email. And we're also going to be distributing a cheat sheet to help you to have some workflows to deal with digital evidence capture. I don't know, do you have any other final words of wisdom here, Justin,
I
about
don't.
digital evidence and operationalizing digital evidence for OSINT investigations?
Do the basics and you'll win every time.
Timestamp, hash it, keep track of your investigation,
That's it.
capture all the
Who,
things.
what, where, when.
Very cool.
That's it.
Okay, so where can people follow you since you are such a highly sought after social media focused open source intelligence investigations influencer?
Yes, yes. And
Character.
Blue Sky. Yeah, character. That's actually probably better. Blue Sky, Justin Sites at Blue Sky, or you can go to bullshithunting.com.
LinkedIn?
Yeah, you can hit me there too. I think I'm Sites Justin there. Same face.
Okay. I think that
How about you? Where can people find you, Brock? Where are
yeah,
you
people
off
can
to?
find me. I'm on Blue Sky. I think Brock Lupton. I'm on Twitter, Brock Lupton. I'm also on LinkedIn, also Brock Lupton. And
Very easy.
if you're ever interacting with any of the Hunchly social media, it's probably Brock Lupton who's running the Hunchly social media as well. And
Holy.
yeah, crazy, right? And so Hunchly is on X, Twitter, and we're also on Blue Sky. And we also have a pretty active LinkedIn account. And of course, now that we're part of the Maltego family, we're becoming much more integrated with all of the awesome stuff that Maltego is doing. So you'll start to see more and more Hunchly stuff being shared and amplified, and likewise with all the awesome stuff that's going on with Maltego Graph Desktop and Maltego Evidence and Maltego Monitor and all of the things that people might not know about and all the exciting things that are coming out and I think will be out in the next little while. But I think with that, like I said, everything that hasn't been answered, we're going to cover that. And I think we're ready to wrap up. So once again, I just want to thank everybody for coming to our webinar. We had a kind of an overwhelming sign up, which is amazing. I think I pin that all on the return of Justin to talk about Hunchly, which is awesome. And of course, thank you very much, Justin, for taking the time. I know you're busy and I know you've got lots going on. So there you go. But that's it. I think that's it from us. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for having me. I
Thank you
appreciate
for
it. And it
coming
was so
in.
nice to see some of the old names. It's great.
All right, great. Thanks, everybody.
See ya.